In the East Midlands, can Ukip steal seats in Labour's heartlands?
I'll vote Ukip. I won't vote Labour ever again.
This is a very strong Labour place. I would be surprised if Ukip took it on.
You could put a pig up in this constituency with a red rosette on and it'd get in.
And the villagers planning to pay for their own security patrols to replace the missing police officers.
We already pay £1 million to the police for this parish, and we've got one PCSO. To me, that is not good enough.
Hello, I'm Mari Ashby, and my guests this week are Edward Argar, the Conservative MP for Charnwood, and Glenys Wilmot, Labour MEP for the East Midlands. Welcome to you both. First, Europe, and the government outlined its timetable for Brexit this week. 3 of our MPs voted against it, Chris Leslie and Graham Allen from Labour, and Ken Clarke from the Conservatives. Edward Argar, you were a Remainer before the campaign. Are you a convert now to Brexit?
I've always been very clear that the result of the referendum, whatever it was, had to be accepted, respected and delivered on. And I'm very clear that the Prime Minister has set out the right approach to do that. We aim to invoke Article 50 to begin the process of leaving by the end of March next year, and I'll be voting for that.
So what did you make then of Ken Clarke voting against the timetable, the only Conservative MP in the country to do so?
Well, Ken is an extremely experienced and knowledgeable member of the House. He's got long-held views on this subject, and that is for Ken to vote as his conscience dictates. But I'm very clear that I will be voting for the invocation of Article 50 by the end of March next year, in line with the Prime Minister's plan.
Glenys Wilmot, you're an MEP and the leader of the Labour group in Brussels. What is the atmosphere like there at the moment since the referendum?
It's not easy, as you can imagine, and we've had a lot of support as people who campaigned to remain in, but I think people are now getting used to the idea that Britain is going to leave. I don't think there's any... We have to follow the will of the people, there's no doubt about that, but we want to make sure that we get the best deal for British people that we can, and we're working very hard with colleagues in the European Parliament and elsewhere to make sure that they understand that this isn't a slight against them. This is about Britain's decision, and we need a good deal, not just for us, but for them as well. So it's really important.
Is that what MEPs are doing at the moment?
Yes, we're working closely. We're having various meetings with different people, with different negotiators, and saying, look, you know, this isn't about punishing the British people. This is about getting a good deal that suits the British people and suits the rest of the EU too.
And are your EU colleagues listening to you?
Absolutely. I think there was a lot of anger at first. Initially, there was a lot of anger, but I think now the realisation has sunk in. They're now starting to understand that, you know, they have to be fair and we want a good deal. But there's no doubt, whatever deal we get, we've got to make sure that the government's held to account and that they do get the best deal that's in British interests.
OK, well, next, Ukip may have failed to make a big dent against the Conservatives in this week's Sleaford by-election, but there are predictions that the party could be a major threat to Labour here in the East Midlands. One academic who studied the party's rise has been drawing up a list of the region's seats which Ukip could win in a general election. Our political editor Tony Roe has been looking at the findings.
Kirkby and Ashfield, the heart of the Ashfield constituency. Along with Mansfield, one of the Labour seats in the East Midlands, Ukip could target at the next general election after a tenfold increase in support last year. And the reason? A strong support for Brexit here.
I'll vote Ukip. I won't vote Labour ever again.
Why not?
Because of their views on Brexit. I think they should go by what the people have voted for, and I think they should honour it.
This is a very strong Labour place. I would be surprised if Ukip took it on, but you never know. People are unpredictable, I guess.
As regards Ukip, I firmly believe good luck to him with Mr Farage, but we'll never get my vote. You could put a pig up in this constituency with a red rosette on and it'd get in.
At the University of Nottingham, an expert on the rise of Ukip, Dr Caitlin Malazzo, reckons with a new leader in Paul Nuttall, targeted campaigning at seats like Ashfield could be effective.
UKIP's going to hit hard on these issues because they're going to try to exploit the idea that the MPs are out of step, particularly in Labour constituencies, with their constituents, right? And that's going to really resonate. So whether or not that's going to be enough to convert it into seats is another matter, but it's certainly going to hurt Labour in the East Midlands and across the country.
It says around the sculpture in the centre of town, let not the toil of our forebears be forgotten, but let it be reborn in new industry and endeavour for the future. Problem is, those industries aren't here yet for Kirkby.
One reason perhaps why people here feel left behind, why they voted to leave the EU to protest. Labour here say they're not being complacent though. Most weekends they're out campaigning.
Gloria is well aware of what her constituents feel, and she's done a survey, which I'm sure she will publish shortly, asking the people what they want from Brexit. You know, we are very, very active. We are not complacent at all.
The Greens say to see off the UKIP challenge in seats like this, alliances between opposition parties may be necessary.
In the Green Party, we are open for progressive alliances, meaning to work together with Labour, possibly the Lib Dems, to really oppose the rise of the far right.
As for the Lib Dems, they used to be the main opposition to Labour here, the party of protest. How on earth are they going to recover the votes they lost to UKIP?
The political landscape as of June the 23rd has changed. The lines have been redrawn around a single issue, and there's only one party on one side of that, and that's us.
A lot depends on the timing of the next election. What will UKIP stand for if we're out of the EU?
UKIP's best campaigning position is going to be if hard Brexit is delayed, or or they don't quite go for the hard Brexit. If they do, UKIP's in a tough position because essentially Theresa May has flanked them in many of these areas.
How UKIP targets seats will also be important. Will they have enough resources and the organisation? Fighting a general election is completely different to a by-election or a referendum.
Well, joining us is the leader of the UKIP group on Derby City Council, Alan Graves, a former Labour man, himself. Alan, there's a lot of talk of UKIP winning Labour seats, but we did hear there in Tony Roe's report that Labour loyalties run deep. I think one man described it as they'd vote for a pig with a red rosette on.
Well, the thing is, we are taking a lot of the Labour voters. Each year we're increasing more. In fact, only today I've just signed up a Labour member into the UKIP fold.
OK, well, good for you. You're not making great inroads, it has to be said, into Conservative territory. So maybe Labour's territory is the way that you're going to have to go if you want to make a big splash in Parliament.
Well, you've got to be aware that the Conservatives are in a honeymoon period. Theresa May is still in a honeymoon period. When she fails to produce the Brexit that people want, then I think you'll see the Conservative voters changing over back to UKIP. But I do agree with you, we are taking a lot of Labour voters. We are appealing to Labour voters up and down the country.
How concerned are you about that, Glenys Wilmot?
Well, nobody could be complacent. We shouldn't be complacent, and obviously we would be concerned if that was the case. But when it comes to a general election, people vote on a whole range of other things. At the moment, the referendum's still in people's minds, and we saw in the by-election recently that it was about Brexit. When you went on the doors, it was still about Brexit. When we come to a general election, people want to know is, what are UKIP's policies on the NHS? The current leader thinks there should be more privatisation of the NHS, which is not something Labour voters agree with. It's about education. It's about a whole range of issues, and UKIP haven't got those answers.
Caitlin Milazzo did say, though, in our film that your party's out of step with voters in places like Ashfield and Mansfield.
I think when you've just had that referendum vote and it's still fresh in people's mind, it is still about that, and people are still talking about whether should be Remain or whether we should go. Now, yes, Labour campaign for Remain, but we've accepted the will of the British people, and there will be a Brexit. Now we have to decide what sort of Brexit, and nobody voted for a hard Brexit. Nobody voted to lose jobs and lower living standards. So we have to make sure we get the best Brexit deal we can possibly get, and that's our job, to make sure the government does that.
Edward Argar?
Well, I think what we've seen recently, and we saw it in Sleaford on Thursday, is that the UKIP vote share went down. It was a very strong endorsement, I think, that result of the Prime Minister's approach. And we've seen in opinion polls that UKIP, which was on about 19% in some polls as recently as 6 months ago, is now down to 10 or 11%. I'd urge caution, of course, because what this year's taught us in politics is be careful, don't predict anything, because who knows?
More of a threat to the Conservatives right now?
What's going to happen?
Based on what we've seen.
On the basis of what I've seen, and I think we saw in Sleaford and North Hykeham again, the Lib Dems, there is a Lib Dem vote there, but it was a very weak Lib Dem vote compared with the overall result for the Conservatives. And what I've found on the doorstep, and what I find in my own constituency, is a number of people who've toyed with UKIP in the past coming back to the Conservatives because they believe Theresa May is the right person to actually deliver Brexit and get the best deal for Britain.
That's what you heard in Sleaford. Alan Graves, how do you go about winning in places like Ashfield and Mansfield then?
Well, first of all, we're actually on 14%, not 10 or 11. So our vote is actually holding firm. If you look at the results, the Conservative vote actually lowered a lot more than ours did. And actually the Labour vote disintegrated in Sleaford. So let's get the facts straight. I think UKIP are doing very well because we've just had a horrendous summer as a party, and I think that's very positive for us because there we are holding our vote in a place like Sleaford and North Icombe. So I'm very pleased with the result, and I think that particularly the Labour Party need to be very, very careful because they will go into oblivion if they're not careful.
You're disintegrating and could go into oblivion as a party.
I don't agree with that. There was only 1,000 votes between UKIP and Labour. Between UKIP, Liberal and Labour, there was 1,000 votes on Thursday, so it wasn't
but
such
you
a
dropped
huge.
To fourth.
It wasn't such a huge. Well, we were never going to win in a seat like that. We've never.
Well, we went to second.
Wait a minute. We never were going to win. You thought you were going to do better because you had your leader there. Paul Nuttall was there, thinking that UKIP were going to do better, and they didn't.
Well,
so it must have been very disappointing.
It doesn't look good though, does it?
It was
in Richmond, you lost your deposit.
It was a disappointing result. Obviously, it was a disappointing result, but I do think we all know what by-elections are like. And in a general election, people make their choices on different issues.
Is one of the things that attracts people to UKIP, though, things that are very practical? I mean, there's an example here of UKIP doing things on the ground in Derby, for example. The Labour Council there isn't having any bin collections over Christmas, and UKIP are actually offering to do them, which I believe they also did last year. That's the kind of bread and butter stuff they can do on the ground, and maybe that's what attracts people to them.
Well, I think that's jolly decent of them to do that. If there's no bin collections, that's fantastic that they're doing that. But that is not what people vote on in a general election, really. They want to know, what are you doing about educating our kids? What are you doing about accident and emergency levels? What are you doing about all of these big things? What are you doing about wages and jobs? UKIP has no answers to that, and we all know that. As I said, Paul Nuttall thinks that the NHS should be privatised. That is not what most.
Not true.
That's
not true.
Are you denying that he said that? He has said that.
He's not saying that he wants the NHS privatised. What he wants is he wants a more efficient NHS. That's what he's looking for.
He has said, he's on record as saying that we should have more privatisation in the NHS. Labour voters do not agree with that.
Well, the biggest privatisation in the NHS came when the Labour Party were in control. So let's get our facts straight.
They will make their views known in a general election, and I don't think you'll see that UKIP will be winning many seats in a general election.
We also, in our report, heard from Kat Burtka there, didn't we, from the Greens in the East Midlands, and she was calling for an alliance of opposition parties. Is that something that would worry you, Edward?
No, and I think what's important, actually,
is
that the voters get the choice that they would expect in an election. If people feel strongly with a particular party political view that they have a platform to put forward, I think they should be honest with voters, put themselves forward for election and take their chances at the polls. What I think would be wrong would be essentially for sort of backroom deals in smoke-filled rooms of parties to carve up who does or doesn't go on that ballot paper to see who's got the best chance. I think let people put themselves forward, as we've always done in this country, democratically. Let the people choose, rather than trying to carve it up.
But what we need is a more proportional representation, a form of proportional representation in our country. If you look at the last general election, we got nearly 4 million votes, which in proportional terms would have been 83 MPs. We got 1, so there is something wrong with our electoral system.
OK, Alan Graves, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, another referendum could be on the horizon in the East Midlands, but don't panic, it's just for one Nottinghamshire village. People in Selston are deciding tomorrow if they should have a vote on bringing in their own private security to replace police patrols lost because of cuts. Helen McCulloch's been along to hear their complaints.
The problems we have, though, are in the evenings when you've got antisocial behaviour. You've got kids who come here for the drugs pickups and drop-offs are in this corner here. And then you've got them causing problems for the neighbours here and the neighbours there. They're kicking the fence and doing all kinds of things.
And do you think those kids that turn up, they know that there's no police around, right?
They do. Of course they do. They know there's no police.
They're problems many people will recognise in our rural areas. A community that feels isolated and neglected by its police force.
The last arresting officer left here, this contact centre, left here in October 2015. We have no arresting police officers, so if there is any incidences, we have to ring the police and wait for somebody to come. We only have response. And the response time is roughly 7 minutes if they're available, in which time somebody could be beaten to death.
Police have said repeatedly that the traditional bobbies on the beat isn't necessarily the best way to fight crime. But a declining police presence here in Selston has led the parish council to offer its own rather radical solution, its own private police force.
The scheme's based on a similar idea at the village of Tiptree in Essex. The village is probably more famous for its jams, but it was the first to bring in private security patrols or marshals. Council taxpayers are charged an extra £1 to cover the cost. And Tiptree Parish Council says the marshals haven't made any arrests yet, but antisocial behaviour in the village has fallen and people feel safer. The Selston scheme would see council tax bills rise by £25 a year.
I don't like it. As simple as that. It's too much. We pay enough as it is.
The police should be doing the jobs as it is, really.
In principle, I think it's a good idea myself. Personally, I think it's a good idea.
Nottinghamshire Police Commissioner Paddy Tipping is in charge of choosing police priorities in the county and says cuts to police budgets are a big part of the problem.
Online crime is a big issue. Who would have thought that terrorism was such a big threat as it is at the moment? That takes resources. Giving people a say, asking them to pay more locally and be less dependent on government grant makes a lot of sense.
We already pay £1 million to the police for this parish, and we've got one PCSO. To me, that is not good enough. We have become a cash cow to the urban areas.
What's your message to the government then on this one?
They can support the banks. Why can't they support the police? Why are they not supporting the people that elect them? They should be giving the police whatever funding they need so that we citizens can feel safe. At the moment, people in Selston do not feel safe.
The police say overall crime is falling in Selston, and there has been opposition to the plan in the village itself. There'll be a public meeting tomorrow to decide whether to go ahead with a referendum on the scheme.
Edward Argar, you have a lot of rural areas in your constituency. Would you approve of them paying extra to get more security?
Well, I think what we are seeing, and we mustn't forget the spending projections by the government are that by 2019 to 2020, actually, there'll be an additional £900 million going into policing. So we need to get that in context. There are changes in the way that policing is happening. In my own county of Leicestershire, we've seen similar changes. We've protected and kept neighbourhood policing as a service, and it's very effective. We've seen crime over the past 5 years or so drop by over 25%.
But the parish chairman was insistent that he isn't blaming the police. He's blaming the cuts brought in by your government and your own police force. When you're talking about your constituency and the county in Leicestershire has made £36 million of cuts in the last 5 years and estimates it needs to find another 20 million by 2020.
But let's look at those figures. Firstly, as I said, we have seen the projections for an increase in police spending by 2019 to 2020 overall. We've also seen in Leicestershire a significant reduction in crime, including antisocial behaviour. And I think the same is true, if I recall the figures, for Nottinghamshire and for that part of Nottinghamshire.
But are you saying that those people who live in Selston, it's not a real problem for them? Because they certainly feel this is very real, it's on their doorstep.
But what I've also said is that, certainly in Leicestershire, and I believe Paddy Tipping in Nottinghamshire is doing the same, there is still a police presence, there is still neighbourhood policing, and I think we heard the chairman of the parish council there say that they could have someone there within about 7 minutes to deal with that.
It does come to something though, Glenys Wilmot, doesn't it, when villages like this are considering that as an option? Would you be for it, for villages like that, bringing in their own private security?
Well, they're still having to pay the precept for ordinary policing, normal policing.
So
they shouldn't have to pay more. I think it's a decision for them, but they shouldn't have to. I think there's been a drop of about 18% in numbers of police officers in Nottinghamshire alone, and people always feel safer when police officers are visible. And it doesn't matter about other things that are happening, but people want to see bobbies on the beat. That's what they want, and it does make them feel safer.
Edward Argar was saying that more money is going to be spent in the longer term.
You know, people are saying crime's gone down. That may be the case, but if those villagers aren't seeing policemen around or seeing police women around, that makes a difference to the perception and
how they feel, because they don't feel safe, Edward Argar. They don't feel safe.
Well, looking at the latest, and again, I'll go to Leicestershire on this one if I may, because I know the perceptions data there. Again, people are saying they do feel safe and they believe that Leicestershire Police provide a very good service. Now in Selston, we heard from the parish council chairman there saying that people had concerns. You also heard in that report them saying this is an issue which has mixed opinions in the village. The reality is also that, yes, as Glenys says, she's absolutely right, a police presence and that reassurance and that deterrence value of the Bobby on the beat is very important.
Well, then maybe people should have to pay more for the police, which is what Paddy Tipping was saying.
But we've also got to look at the way that crime is changing, and one of the biggest new types of crime is cybercrime. That's not dealt with by a Bobby on a beat, that's dealt with by very technically highly trained officers sitting, working through that. So we've got to recognise that the way that policing happens has changed.
So how would you give more money to the police?
I actually agree about the cybercrime issue, and obviously need people working on that. But people's fear, whether it's perception or not, has to be dealt with. And if they feel they need more bobbies on the beat, then we should be looking at that. And you can't do that.
But how would you pay for that?
If you reduce police numbers by 80%, well, we've got to stop having cut upon cuts upon cuts. We've had these years and years of cuts, and our finances, public finances, are not improved. Well, what good has it done? People have had the pain. They've had no gain, and it's time we stop that and change things around.
We'll have to leave it there. Time now for a roundup of some of the other political stories from the East Midlands this week. Here's Tony with 60 seconds.
400 posts could go and services will be cut by Leicestershire County Council in its latest budget proposal, and it still needs to save another £28 million. The chairman of the Sharbrook-based Sports Direct says an extreme political, union and media campaign has damaged its reputation and influenced customers. The company revealed a big fall in profits this week, which it also blamed partly on the fall in the pound. Concerns about the growth of giant distribution centres has been raised in Parliament by the South Leicestershire MP. Alberto Costa is worried about plans to double the size of Magna Park.
At what point do we say enough is enough? How large do these logistics parks need to get?
The government was sympathetic to his call for a national policy. The worldwide success of Leicester City and the discovery of Richard III's body could help to attract £50 million of investment and create thousands of jobs in the city. The Mayor, Sir Peter Soulsby, says Leicester is now firmly on the international map.
And that is the Sunday Politics here in the East Midlands. Thanks to Glenys Wilmot and Edward Argar for being this week's guest. Time now, though, to hand you back to Andrew Neil.